exploring the magical world and visionary art of Rosaleen Norton. The Australian artist Rosaleen Norton was born October 2, 1917 and died December 5, 1979. Norton conceptualized her artworks within the context of the occultist writings of Eliphas Levi and Aleister Crowley, as well as the psychoanalytical writings of Carl Jung. Norton was what one could consider to be a trance artist, in a sense not unlike the otherworldly demoniac imagery of Austin Osman Spare. Her art evokes the hidden recesses of her spirit self and manifests the subconscious atavisms within the earthly realm. She used her visionary abilities to directly access her primal mind to facilitate automatic drawings. She lived a bohemian lifestyle and her many artworks were displayed at art galleries throughout Sydney, Australia. Her art became known to the world on a wider scale with the publication of The Art of Rosalind Norton with poems by Gavin Greenlees, published in a lavish red, leather-bound limited edition release in 1952. There is no evidence that she was ever involved in any magical organization such as the Golden Dawn, the AA or the OTO. There is no mention of her ever having met or exchanged letters with Crowley or ever having met Frank Bennett, who was Crowley's initiate who established an OTO lodge in Australia during Crowley's lifetime and was briefly a resident of the Abbey of Thelema in 1921. Once Norton discovered Pan, while still a student at a girls' school, she deeply resonated with the qualities which the god represented. This was realized at age 12 when she was to be confirmed. At this point she quit believing in Christianity and was drawn to pantheism. Pantheism is derived from the Greek pan meaning all, and theos meaning God. It refers to the religious and philosophical view that everything in existence is of an all-encompassing immanent God, or that the universe or nature, and God are equivalent. All is God. Norton perceived the reflection of divinity in all forms of life. She viewed Pan as the ruler and god of the earth and stated that if Pan was the devil from the orthodox perspective, then she wasn't afraid to consider herself a devil worshipper. She regarded Pan as a deeper atavistic level of reality which was primordial, and existed beneath man's limited perception of conscious awareness. Norton also added to her pantheon the gods Hecate, Lilith and Lucifer. She regarded Hecate as a powerful goddess whose assistance could be called upon for hexes and cursing as well as powerful beneficent protection. Lilith represented the nocturnal world and the element of air. She was intrigued with Kabbalistic mythology, which stated that Lilith was Adam's first wife, and upon sensing that he was trying to possess mastery over her, she was able to use the formula of the secret name of God and arose in the air and flew off to a hiding place deep within the sea. Lilith then became a Lamia and was a threat to all children. Norton also had deep sentiments regarding children. She considered the idea of childbearing repugnant and felt that it would detract from her own completeness. Lucifer represented a rebellious point of view and was a highly evolved intelligence who had attained a wealth of hidden wisdom. She perceives Lucifer's role as being the light-bearer, and felt that the highest reward of life is the eternal adventure of the quest for wisdom. Lucifer had been expelled from heaven because of excessive pride. Believing himself to be self-sufficient and having no reliance upon God for sustenance. Originally in the Bible he was strictly a fallen angel, but through time came to be viewed as a demon, and eventually his name was interchangeable as a title for Satan. Norton didn't regard Lucifer as evil, but rather saw him as one who binds and limits mankind when they attempt to overstep their bounds, by revealing the limits of one's ego and the extent of one's self-pride. In her depictions of the gods, only the qualities which the gods revealed and manifested on the astral tour were depicted directly as she perceived and experienced them. She felt the energies of the gods literally flowing through her. One function that she served was as a receiver who was able to pick up that which was being transmitted to her by other intelligences via the magical current. She had been expelled from the Chatswood Girls' Grammar School at age 14 because her teachers deemed that her artwork was a corrupting influence on her fellow classmates. Next she enrolled at the East Sydney Technical School. Her art instructor was Rainer Hoff, the renowned sculptor. At this point, 3 of her macabre short stories were published by the Australian newspaper, Smith's Weekly. These have recently been republished by Keith Richmond as 3 Macabre Stories by Rosaleen Norton, Titan Press, 2010. Her early writings seem to be influenced by weird tales and specifically by the brooding atmospheres which are portrayed in the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. Shortly thereafter, she was hired as an illustrator at Smith's Weekly, but she quickly proved to be too extreme and unconventional for the sensibilities of the publishers, and was fired after a mere 8 months of service. She then took on a position as a part-time bartender and waitress in order to generate income. She also began to model for Norman Lindsay, a fellow artist whose work was done in a provocative style similar to Rosaleen. Norton began to deeply study the work of Freud, Jung, Blavatsky, Levi, Fortune and Crowley, whose work she found to be extremely inspirational. She was a voluminous reader of occult literature and was steeped in the greatest minds that contributed to this field, but it was her familiars, the elementals and spirits dwelling on the astral, who taught her the greatest lessons of occult knowledge. This work was done on the inner planes, and it was in this environment that she made her greatest strides. Norton incorporated into her system a number of magical beings from a number of traditions including Thohat, dynamic energy of cosmic ideation; Busatoro, an eidolon or phantasm; Eloi, fantasy spirit of Jupiter; Makalith, the laugher, an archangel who manifests in this world as humor; Erzuli, the voodoo priestess of Mamloi; and the Deburos, which represents the universal mind. She also received astral assistance from her servitor, who sometimes went by the name Hilarion, but she generally called Brother Janicot. Janicon was a god in Basque's witchcraft, which Norton was well acquainted with. There were many visual similarities which Janicot shared with the god Pan. Norton also often communed with Qliphoth or shells of incomplete spirits which inhabit the night side of the Tree of Life. In the Art of Rosalind Norton she recalls her encounter with the Werplin, which was a fearsome insect-human crossbreed. Much of the information involving her description of the astral and her methods of traversing it were provided from an interview conducted with L. J. Murphy shortly after her exhibition in Melbourne in August 1949. This interview provides valuable insight into her methodology and understanding of the astral realm and contains a cogent system derived from many years of deep study and an innate and intuitive understanding regarding the nature of this alternate reality, which bears a symbiotic relationship to the physical world we inhabit. She often used self-hypnotism and trance induction to explore the etheric realm. Many of these encounters were portrayed in the subject matter for her artwork. Norton first began to experiment with self-hypnosis in 1940. She continuously evolved her methods of trance drawing to illustrate other levels of consciousness. After becoming adept in trance induction techniques, she set out to charter areas normally inaccessible to those still residing in their corporeal bodies. As a medium to explore whether life continues after the death of the physical bodies, she chose to utilize the method of automatic writing. In an early experiment, after a brief time passed, she noticed the pen moving freely of its own accord but recording only subconscious ramblings and symbolic imagery. Suddenly an unmistakable awareness of another presence began to guide her hand. The answers to all of the questions she posed were articulated precisely and definitively. After about 10 months of using this technique, Norton developed an outline of a philosophical and metaphysical conception of the universe and the mysteries of life after death. This was completely beyond her mind's conception and consisted of abstract theoretical formulas of high-level mathematics represented symbolically. This opened a gateway in her mind which activated a highly sensitive psychic ability and introduced methods of mental communication with non-corporeal entities that she attracted in her trance states. She then developed an overwhelming interest in exploring the realms of existence which are normally only accessible to those who have experienced the death of their physical bodies. Norton asked her spirit guides if it was indeed possible to access this terrain. The answer was affirmative, but it was stated that it would be necessary for the cooperative will from two planes of being for this to be safely accomplished. This involved the process of astral projection and the ability for her to consciously travel and maneuver in the astral realm. It required several months of psychic guidance before she would be sufficiently adept to achieve this. During one attempt she felt her heartbeat and breathing slow to the point where it was barely perceptible. She then felt a strong sense of cessation and felt as if her whole body was dissolving to foam. This experiment was interrupted by her husband, who upon discovering her in this state immediately rousted her, fearing that she was under physical and psychic distress. Further experiments involved clairaudience. One afternoon while washing clothes, her mind went into a vacuous state and she suddenly had a strong sensation of another entity which was in close proximity to her. As if her mind was a wireless receiver, she began to perceive that the entity was communicating to her. It was revealed to her that this process involved the utilization of parts of the brain which normally remain inactive. She was also told that interplane transfer would occur with her in 1 month. This was described as being a sensation of ecstasy which involved the dissolution of her physical body, and gradually reformed into a plasmic body which was formed out of a warm golden light. Norton described that this body was the very essence of sensuousness and far beyond the limitations of the senses known to her through physical sensation. Both extremely pleasurable sensations as well as very unpleasant ones. These experiences led Norton to develop a magical conception of the universe. She discovered experientially that the other realm of being was controlled through the active projection of thought. In this dimension, thought is a tangible consistency which can transform into a pulsating, vibrant life form. Entities in this plane are able to assume forms at will, and frequently change appearance so that a multitude of qualities are able to be perceived by the observer. As this world of the astral is conceived, it is vaster than any other vista known through the physical world. These entities emanate the essence of male, female and neutral energy. They also consist of other orders of being, both higher and lower, and also can be formed from abstract ideas and thought forms that can be created into an etheric entity. Norton also experienced becoming the embodiment of an abstract idea. Rather than it forming as a separate entity, it formed as an extenuation of her astral body. In a sense, giving birth to ideas and conceptions in the astral dimension. On this plane, it is possible for the eye to merge with beings of other classes of non-human intelligences. She experienced archetypal forms which were created from the very essence of form itself. There exists a perfect systematized order of intelligences which revealed itself to Rosaleen Norton. There are a number of planes which she perceived, that interblended and became more refined and abstract and revealed other dimensions which were composed of a higher order of the concepts of life, time and space. She was able to attain a greater and more transcendent appreciation of cosmic laws governing the universe. Through practice, she trained her mind to focus her abstract thinking in such a way as to project her focused will and manifest many thought forms in the astral. In this realm there is a unity which coexists between the thinker and the object of focus, which is experienced through sensation and emotion. A new sense is created that supersedes the physical five senses, and becomes greatly intensified. It is composed of an indefinable essence that is incomparable to any physical experience. It is transcendent and all-encompassing. On this plane, the notion of God forms is realized as a projection of one's consciousness to create a mythic construct. Thus, She defined the reality of a god's manifestation as a projection of a group mind, ascribing to it a clearly delineated definition of what particular qualities become attributable to a specific god. This sort of evocation is created as a human construct. Through the creation of these god forms, an observer is able to perceive these gods which have been made manifest on the astral plane. Some of these gods have been created by non-human intelligences. Norton's experimentation into the realm of the Qliphoth was thoroughly explored and documented in her works of art and in her writings. In the Art of Rosalind Norton, she discusses the wordplane, which inhabited the Qliphothic domain, and Norton describes the meeting as a horrific encounter. She stated that the phenomena involving the manifestation of intelligences follow a unique set of occult physics. They are composed of fluid plasmic matter which has the ability to alter its form as the situation dictates. The form which is assumed is directly proportional to the consciousness of the observer as well as the thought forms and the ideas being projected. Through the myth-making function, the unconscious mind conceives a god or astral intelligence, and projects the image that is comprised of specific attributes which are proper to it. The symbolic being projected is composed of the self, and is a reflection of the mind of the creator. A group consciousness conceived gods which have been designed to serve specific needs and desires of the adherents. Such is also the nature of the representations of demons and spirits, as they pertain to the one who perceives them. There is a tremendous power that is drawn from the intense concentration of the collective unconscious mind which has been creating god forms through the medium of the plasmic, from time immemorial. The intelligences themselves have an existence independent from that of the observers, and the communications reflect only one facet of their being. This is one reason that the symbolic representations of the intelligences in the astral exist in a state of flux and fluidity, and continuously morph and alter their form. Norton states that the god forms can be regarded by the initiate as a portal which exists between the realm of human consciousness and the plane she terms Deva consciousness. The links to these entities exist on the inner plane and are wholly pervasive, and underlie the foundation of the omniverse. She was of the opinion that the gods exist in their own right and completely maintain their own existence independent to that of any human interaction. Through the constructs of god forms, however, humans are sometimes able to encounter a particular aspect of the gods. Pan, Lucifer and Hecate are not merely extensions of Rosalind's consciousness, but rather they have a consciousness and presence of their own, and manifest and choose to interact with humans of their own volition. They are not subject to the whims of human will. The gods are able to contact humans on the inner planes by projecting god forms, which sensitive occultists are able to communicate with. Rosalyn also had a strong rapport with the animal intelligence, and felt a stronger affinity for animals than many from the human population. Many viewed her as an outsider who had dismissed social convention in favor of weird immoral interests. Animals were an extension of the consciousness of the elemental kingdom, which she was very connected to. In 1935 she married Beresford Lionel Conroy. The first few years of the marriage were spent traveling in the east coast of Australia. After returning from the war, serving as a commando in the AIF, he and Norton were divorced. She then began contributing illustrations to a monthly magazine called Pertinent. She began her explorations into the astral realm, which proved to be a fecund foundation as a basis for her visionary art. Norton's astral artwork from the 1940s such as Astral Scene and Sphinx and Her Secrets, features a depiction of Norton in a state of comatose lucidity. She experienced contact with the active and passive principles of nature in god forms, and had an encounter with Lucifer whom she didn't regard as an evil being, but rather an intelligence who chose to play the role of the adversary. Her sister Cicely notes that on one occasion early in her trance experiences, she went into a trance state which lasted for 5 days. It was while working at Pertinent that she met Gavin Greenlees. He was a poet and would soon become her paramour and magical partner. Even though Rosaleen was 13 years older than Gavin, there was a strong sexual attraction which she felt towards him. Gavin also felt compelled to explore the visionary states of consciousness, and through the assistance of Norton he was able to draw back the veil of Isis and explore the realm of subconscious thought forms. Greenlees and Norton moved to Melbourne, and in 1940, Rosaleen showed her art at an exhibition at Melbourne University. A mere 2 days after it opened, the police raided the show and they confiscated 4 paintings deemed to be offensive. Black magic was one of these. In this work, a black panther is in the throes of carnal embrace with a female figure. She explained that black magic deals with the initiation of the witch into the infernal mysteries. The panther depicted the powers of the night, which Norton was embracing. She was charged with violating obscenity laws. Critics of her work considered it to be pornographic, depraved, inspired by works of demonolatry and likely to corrupt the morals of those who chose to view them. Norton maintained that much of the objection to her work was due to the lurid and impure attitude espoused by those who strongly voiced their opposition to her works, which represented a fig leaf, puritanical morality wherein any normal sexual attitudes had been repressed, which led to hostility and dysfunction. The poem included with black magic was written by Norton, and describes her ritual encounter with the god of the night. Charges were dropped after academics provided that her works were to be viewed in the context of pantheism, paganism and the worship of Greek fertility gods. In the 1950s, Norton and Gavin took up residence in the City King's Cross section of Sydney. She already had gained notoriety as an eccentric bohemian artist who had a predilection for witchcraft. Gavin exuded an otherworldly aura, at times verging on the edge of being in a nocturnal, dream-like state. Greenlees was working within the surrealism tradition with his poetry, and in this endeavor with Norton, attempted to evoke the mysterious unknowable realms within the subconscious mind. There are many photos of Norton from this period showing her in front of her altar, as a means of playing up her witchy persona. When Wally Glover first met Rosaleen and Gavin, he was simply a publisher who was looking for freelance assistants to help him in advertising and journalism. Once he met them and was provided with samples of the art and poetry they were creating, he felt that this was indeed something truly unique, which could be presented as a powerful visionary art publication. He began paying her and Gavin £8 a week as a royalty advance. In addition, paperwork was signed which made Wally the copyright holder for the whole of Norton's art, including all that had been previously created, as well as those she would produce in the future. The plan for this publication was to merge Gavin's occult poetry with Norton's evocative visionary art. Through the persistent efforts of Wally, the Art of Rosalind Norton was published in mid-August 1952 in a red and gold leather-bound edition of 500 copies. This book was dedicated to the King in Yellow, with grateful acknowledgement to the familiars, and the very peculiar people, who helped in various ways to make it possible, and to those heavily disguised angels, the 2 demons. The bibliographical section of the Art of Rosalind Norton lists a number of psychological works which were valuable inputs, as well as the many magical works which she found to be important. She cites a number of Jung's works, Fraser's The Golden Bough, Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice, Levi's The History of Magic, and Dion Fortune's The Mystical Kabbalah. It is quite evident that Norton was heavily influenced by the magical writings of Aleister Crowley and the works of Dion Fortune. Glover put the whole of his energies into the production of this book and published it in as spectacular a form as was financially feasible. He sent a copy of the book to T.S. Eliot, Carl Jung, Albert Einstein and C.S. Lewis. Rosaleen also sent a long letter to Lewis detailing her considerable and formidable understanding of the occult. She felt that Lewis was the first fiction writer to accurately depict the cosmology which she recognized. In the letter, she had asked him probing questions about his conception of the Qliphothic forces, and elucidated to him her cosmology, which bore much similarity to the early Kabbalists and Gnostics who explained it as different emanations radiating from the source, and as a series of different levels of consciousness, which she perceived while in various states of her trance explorations. A launch party was held for the publication. The attitude at this point remained cautiously optimistic despite the controversy, and a favorable article appeared in a weekly, national Australian magazine. The American consul requested a copy and the Pakistani consul held it with such awe that they requested that Norton write an art book which featured the erotic artwork adorning the Pakistani temples. Unfortunately, not many copies of this edition of the book are known to exist. They were considered to be obscene by U.S. customs officials due to their graphic nature of pagan fertility deities in the elementals that she depicted, and consequently a major quantity of the book The Art of Rosalind Norton was destroyed in an attempt to censor the material from the public. Immediately upon sending copies to the U.S., it was confiscated by customs officials, who claimed that it was an obscene publication due to the nudity and the extremely vibrant, evocative, hunting occult imagery Norton presented throughout. After the publication of the book, it was called into question due to its licentious nature in an article from Australia Sunday. It was suggested that the book should be banned. Some copies of The Art of Rosalind Norton were confiscated and burned by U.S. customs workers. 2 pictures in the book were judged to be indecent. One was Faux Hat, which depicted a leering, horned god, who had a snake for a penis. The other was The Adversary. Wally Glover was charged with publishing obscene material and fined £5. It was demanded the 2 offending pictures were to be blackened out in the copies of The Art of Rosalind Norton, which remained for sale. Wally had to blacken out the offending pages, which he did personally with an ink roller and black ink. Glover was unable to even advertise the book due to adverse reactions it met with, after being targeted by censors, who felt that it had a corrupting influence. He had to declare bankruptcy in 1957, primarily due to this publication, and subsequently lost the copyrights to Norton's artworks, until 1981, after which point he had paid back the monies owed, and received the copyrights back from the bankruptcy office. Norton again testified in court that these images were based upon Greek gods of fertility and nature. Recent articles in the press covered her sordid lifestyle and provocative art, and the notoriety helped to fuel her Queen of Depravity and Abomination's reputation. She came to be known as the Witch of King's Cross. Her continuously expanding public persona was that of a demonically inspired witch who used sexual abandon to create her licentious, lascivious and lewd works of art. The famous English composer, conductor of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, Eugene Goossens was an intimate friend and magic partner of Rosaleen, and participated in sex magic workings with her. Norton found Crowley's writing of sex magic to be extremely helpful and adopted many of his methods into her own system. She collected a wealth of rare occult works including Aleister Crowley's magical writings as well as his erotic verse. She discusses Crowley in her personal correspondence with Goossens, and both were very interested particularly in his writings on sex magic. Goossens had been friends with Philip Heseltine, also known as Peter Warlock, who had met Crowley in 1914 and was a member of the OTO. Goossens offered to teach Norton all that Heseltine had taught to him of the sex magic techniques. Goossens also presented Norton with a copy of the Crowley biography The Great Beast, by John Simmons. She was also interested in Kundalini, and stated that her drawing Faux Hat symbolizes the energy which Kundalini unleashes. In March 1957, he was stopped by customs and it was discovered that he was attempting to smuggle banned books, pornographic materials, and ritual masks which were to be used in the magical rites of Norton. Following this scandal, Goossens lost his position as a conductor and was forced to return to England in public disgrace. By 1957, Greenlees was adversely affected by the continual strain of accusatory articles and was diagnosed as a schizophrenic, and committed to a mental institution. During a temporary release, he attempted to attack Norton with a knife. The attack proved unsuccessful, and he was immediately remanded back to the institution. In 1955, a homeless girl was picked up by police named Anna Karina Hoffman, who stated that she had attended a black mass which was being led by Norton. She later admitted that she had concocted the entire story, but by this point the damage had already been done by newspaper articles that had been written concerning this story. Up until the 1960s, Norton was primarily known only within the confines of Australia. Because she refused to censor her artwork and painter it to reflect more socially palatable and less offensive subject matter, she was excluded from any serious acceptance within the art world, and instead chose to face public ridicule by drawing what was inspirational to her sensibilities, so subsequently her art had been judged to be depraved and obscene. By the 1960s, the Public Witchcraft Acts had been repealed and nature religions were less stigmatized. Norton began to face less scrutiny at being seen as a spectacle and target of ridicule. She continued to sell painting to her patrons, who continued to support her work, and practice magic with a small group of devoted friends. Her coven or witch cult was really more of a small group of intimate friends. In the 1950s, Norton was a known user of dexedrine, methadone, and benzedrine, which helped to give her extended mental focus. She also used LSD in the early 1970s, which provided her another vista to explore the psychic gateways. Her later art employs a vivid wash of technicolor images that burst forth fecund illustrations, and are evident of her psychedelic proclivities. Many similarities exist between the art of Austin Osman Spare and Rosaleen Norton. Both experimented extensively with trance techniques, and the resulting art was composed of reproducing images of elementals and intelligences from the astral plane. Both developed their own systems rather than belonging to a magical group, although Spare was briefly involved with the AA. Both were involved with witchcraft in some capacity, but nothing along the lines of traditional witchcraft. In both cases the artist's early bodies of work evidence a high degree of technical proficiency, which is lacking in their later work. Both achieved mystical states of consciousness and dealt with archetypal constructs which reflected darker and more primal aspects of the soul. Norton's coven followed a traditional form of witchcraft from the Welsh derivation, which was traced to the earliest settlers of Australia. Her group paid special homage to the gods Pan and Hecate. The majority of her group work took place on the inner planes. She instructed her coven that there were two divisions within the astral: human astral and elemental astral. Much of her work took place on the elemental astral. In order to navigate successfully on the astral, the initiate needed to acquire an automatic selective facility which served to filter the amount of information being processed in order that one doesn't become bewildered by the otherworldliness and the infinitude associated to this plane of being. She was quite at ease within the elemental kingdom and maintained a close affiliation within a realm of non-human intelligences. With the aid of these non-human familiars, she traveled beyond the plane of planetary consciousness and met with intelligences which were connected to other star systems. She learned from these familiars that nature itself, or Pan, became an adversary of mankind once man became disassociated from the source of his environment. Norton wrote to Gerald Gardner in the mid-1950s and began a correspondence both with him and Doreen Valenti, who was Gardner's high priestess. She felt that Gardner's laws of the craft were too restrictive and were rooted in too many arbitrary human intercessions, rather than the initiate directly dealing with the source of these energies and experiencing them firsthand. Her witchcraft wasn't limited to following one roadmap, and she freely incorporated elements of theosophy and Crowleyan magical philosophy, and tied these together with Jungian ideas concerning out-of-body consciousness. Her occultism and her art are connected at the root. Her art is exemplary of inner plane experiences. She stated that there were many things that she had omitted from attempting to draw because many things on the astral had no correlation to the earthly plane and would have been unrecognizable shapes and symbols. Norton stated that her coven had 7 members ranging in age from 25 to 51. In The Rebirth of Witchcraft by Doreen Valenti, she includes a chapter of Norton's coven as recorded by the journalist Leslie Roberts, who became an initiate of the Norton coven. She states that her version was known as the Goatfold and had a Welsh origin. Norton's coven practiced inner plane work and astral explorations, which they compared results of the intelligences contacted and the symbols which were encountered. Goossens recorded many astral journeys in which he met with Rosalyn on the astral plane and encountered entities and landscapes with her, and then later compared the results. In the 1960s she was reduced to displaying her art in small cafes which were still supportive of her efforts, but she never attempted any serious exhibitions due to her many legal entanglements. A collection of Norton's writings is included in Thorn in the Flesh, edited by Keith Richmond. This includes autobiographical material, occult writings, and a collection of her poetry. In Thorn in the Flesh, she describes the contents as my journal of agutry, which captures her secret thoughts about herself, events and people involved in her life. What is most remarkable about Rosaleen Norton is her clarity and evocative vision which encapsulated her artistic endeavors. Many boundaries were traversed, and while it would have been a much easier road to toe had she chosen to stay within acceptable bounds, she instead remained true to her integrity and took an uncompromising course which allowed her to stand out as an exceptionally skilled artist, whose merits provided much in the field of occult artistry. It is obvious from reading Norton's collection of writings that she was a high-level occultist who thoroughly understood the theory of magic, and had a great deal of experience exploring the terrain. The Kabbalah provides a solid foundation for her to conceptualize the 4 worlds of existence. Archetypal, creative, formative and material, and to fearlessly transcend her consciousness to the noumenal world. Gurdjieff also plays an important role in Norton's understanding of the cosmic laws which govern the magical world. She also had a thorough comprehension of the abstract nature of a god as the infinite absolute. A mastery of the ability to step outside the constructs of time and space is abundantly evident in all of her writings. In her cosmology, it is possible for gods to intercede with attuned humans by taking on archetypal forms in order to communicate. This provides a greater sense of purpose and connectedness to the world surrounding one, and gives the ability to tap into the source of the divine genius which resides deep within. She correctly perceives the herd mentality of the majority of humanity, who rely heavily on social approval and deceive themselves in an unwavering allegiance to a false sense of self-pride. This must be sacrificed in order to advance spiritually. The multiplicity of the forms of gods is reflected in the diversity of expression inherent in human consciousness. It is through the realization of this divine nature that one can experience the essence of the god forms. In Thorn in the Flesh, several illustrations are given of Norton's ideograms, which are derived from the Yetzironic world, or that of formation. Ideas which are conceived in Braya become manifest in Malkuth. They are similar in appearance to magic squares and are made up of words which were symbolically linked. In the 5-day trance that Norton experienced, what is significant is that in Buddhism this is equivalent to the trance of annihilation. This traditionally lasts for 5 days in the Buddhist tradition. It is one of the most important ordeals for the Buddhist initiate. According to a high-level Buddhist who read this account, She attempted this too early in her evolution and was forced to return to the beginning, so that she might become more well-rounded in her occult development before she would be able to succeed at this. Thorn in the Flesh provides an excellent look into the Rosaleen Norton magical philosophy and is a highly insightful look into many personal observations and the methods which she created in developing her approach to the occult. Hers is a very advanced system, and Thorn of the Flesh should be considered required reading for anyone interested in learning applied magic. The Twizzler or Twitzar is described by Norton as a realm which may be considered another dimension of existence which intersects with our reality. In some aspects it resembles the dream world. On this plane settings and objects which surround oneself may be quite familiar, and yet they are imbued with an otherness which is quite familiar to Norton. This is fully elucidated on in Norton's writings of the Twizzler. It is an elaborate description of this realm which should be read to be appreciated. These writings should be read in bits and pieces and reflected upon to allow the full impact to be fully comprehended. Norton is an incredibly innovative thinker who by no means was limited in her talents to artistic merits, but rather is a self-realized writer who shares the many insights she has gleaned through her initiation into magical realms. On YouTube there is a brief filmed interview with Norton which appears to have been shot in the late 50s or early 60s. It is worth noting that she has a very pronounced Australian accent and is difficult to understand at points. Also she has what appears to be long, crooked teeth which gives her a primeval, atavistic and even otherworldly appearance. It is possible that these may be some sort of prosthetic device designed to make her appear more witchy. In previous photos of her, there were no indications of a snaggletooth, and in fact she was quite photogenic and attractive in pictures of her from the 1950s. Also of note is the CD Roy Speaks readings by Rosaleen Norton which accompanies Thorn in the Flesh. On the CD Norton articulately espouses her magical philosophy in addition to reading her poetry, and although she has a quite heavy accent, it is evident that she is quite knowledgeable and presents a vivacious demeanor. The copyright of the artwork of the book The Art of Rosalind Norton was held by the official receiver in bankruptcy until May 1981, when Glover was at last able to reacquire them. After a tumultuous first edition, this edition was republished in 1982 in an edition of 1,000 copies and featured a new introduction written by Neville Drury, who published the Norton biography Pan's Daughter. It was republished as The Magical World of Rosaleen Norton in 1988. It was followed by a supplement to The Art of Rosalind Norton published in 1984 in a limited edition. This volume features 48 color illustrations by Norton. In 1982, a play was performed at Sydney's Tom Mann Theatre called Rosaleen, Wicked Witch of the Cross. Greenlees died December 5, 1983. Exactly 4 years after Norton died. He never recovered from her death and subsequently lived for a short period after she had passed. In the 1960s, Norton was the head of a coven in King's Cross and was often featured in articles dealing with her life as a witch. What is really significant in reading the writings of Rosaleen Norton is how much original occult thought she conceived. The majority was authenticated by her experientially. When asked by one interviewer what she gets out of her magic practices, she replied, "I get a life that holds infinite possibilities and is entirely satisfying to me on all planes of consciousness."